Assalamualaikum. My name is Zach, and my project is phones, worth the risk. We all use our smartphones from day to day, at work, school, or even home. It makes our lives easier, more efficient, and fun. But we never come to think about the negative effects coming from them. And if we have, how are those studies based? Most studies relied on people, which can be inaccurate. I want a non-biased, non-dependable study to determine if radiation is harmful or not and what impact it has. I was interested if non-ionizing radiation is harmful to reproduction and causes mutation, since non-ionizing radiation is way more prevalent in our lives. But what is radiation and mutation? Radiation is the transportation of energy in waves or particles. Usually, radiation is split up into two main groups, ionizing and non-ionizing. Phones are non-ionizing, but research suggests that they can have nasty health drawbacks. Effects include increased risk of cancer, sickle cell disease, Alzheimer's, vitiligo, and much, much more. That is why I'm testing the effects of phone radiation on yeast. Mutation is the root cause of many diseases. Sometimes, mutation can be caused by genetics, but in many cases, it could be caused by radiation. A mutation is when DNA sequence gets changed in a way that can change the effect of DNA. For example, cancer is caused by mutation in the cells because of deformations that are governed by DNA. Since yeast eats sugar and produces CO2 as a byproduct to reproduce, if a reproductive gene is mutated, it will result in less CO2 because the yeast cannot reproduce. This means setting up a CO2 apparatus will find a correlation if non-ionizing radiation does have an impact on mutation by comparing CO2 levels of the control group compared to the group that is exposed to a phone. To make sure that the experiment works, yeast will be exposed to the inside of a microwave for a short period of time. Since yeast has very low water content, there will be minimal heating. Instead, the radiation will mutate the yeast, ensuring it works. Even if the yeast does get heated, it still shows that if yeast gets harmed, it produces less CO2. My hypothesis is that I estimate that CO2 levels will drop significantly because 92.5% of studies say phones alter DNA in the long-term run. Since yeast is less resilient than us, I think that CO2 levels will drop quite a bit, even with low-level radiation. To carry out my experiment, I'll need an airtight tube, a squeeze bottle, a dishpan, and a 50 milliliter graduated cylinder for my CO2 apparatus. I also need dry yeast, sugar, a phone, and a microwave. To first make the CO2 apparatus, you'll need to fill the dishpan 2/3 of the way full with water. This doesn't have to be exact, since only the temperature matters, since this is just the water being pushed out. Then attach tubing to the squirt bottle tip, fill the graduated cylinder using a dishpan and turn upside down, and it should be full of an upside down. And then dilute 2 teaspoons of sugar with 2/3 a cup of water and stir until it's completely dissolved. Then pour the water-sugar mixture into a squirt bottle, add 1 teaspoon of yeast and slip the tube under the cylinder and wait for 30 minutes and measure the amount of water displaced, which is your CO2. Repeat, but the yeast will be placed on the phone that's calling for an hour and 10 minutes. And repeat, but the yeast will be placed on a microwave for 10 seconds. And repeat each case 3 times and observe the results. My experiment was designed to find the relationship between non-ionizing radiation and mutation. Using a CO2 apparatus to measure reproductive abilities, my experiment results supported my hypothesis. The yeast responded to radiation by clumping up and producing 8.93% less CO2 than the baseline average when exposed to the phone. Therefore, there's a detrimental effect on yeast when exposed to non-ionizing radiation. Since studies have found that yeast and human DNA is interchangeable, this could mean that human DNA could also be harmed by cell phone radiation. Thank you.